Why don't we get started? Looks like we've got a pretty good group. Hi, everyone. My name's Eve Boyce-Ratliff, and I lead partnerships for Upstream Tech. And we will be sharing a bit about what we've been building around trespass detection today using satellite data and AI. Before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to record this and we'll send it out after. So if you want to rewatch it or you want to send it to your colleagues, you will have it. If you have questions, we are going to have a little bit of time for questions at the end. There's a Q&A box, so if you drop it in there, that's where I'll see it and I can answer those questions. And if I don't have a chance to answer them on the call, I'll plan to follow up directly afterwards with you to answer those. And I know everyone is super busy. This is a super busy time of year, so we're going to try to keep this pretty high level in terms of giving you an overview of what we've been building out. But I'll share my email. My colleague Kate can share it in the chat, and then I'll also share it at the end of the presentation. Feel free to send me an email if you want to get into a higher level of detail, or if you have other questions about things that we sort of glance through during this presentation, and I'm happy to discuss them further some other time. So why don't we get started? So just as a sort of quick introduction about who we are a software company that helps organizations make better decisions around land, asset, and water management. And we work with a broad range of different types of partners, from organizations like the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Forest Service to utilities like Brookfield and Engie to the Bureau of Reclamation. We have two products. Lens is what we'll mainly focus on today, and it's a remote monitoring platform that helps teams gain efficiencies using satellite and aerial data. We also have a product called Hydro Forecast that I won't focus on as much today, but it's an AI hydrology model that provides accurate water forecasts, and it's used by teams in the hydropower space, energy trading, shipping, conservation. If that sounds at all interesting to you, feel free to shoot me a note after this call and I can share some more information about what we do in that space. So as I mentioned, we'll focus more on Lens today. And Lens is a remote monitoring platform that aims to help organizations save time and money on monitoring. And for us, that term monitoring is pretty broad. So the through line for most of our customers is that they tend to have an asset or a number of disparate assets that they aren't physically accessing all the time on the ground, but they want a view of what's going on. We work with a number of conservation focused organizations that own a lot of land or hold conservation easements. We work with energy and water utilities. We work with state, local, and federal government agencies, and we also work with private sector companies. So a pretty broad range of different types of organizations that we support, but they all tend to have some kind of land or assets and people within their organization that need to know what's going on, but don't necessarily want to have to get into their trucks and drive out to a site every time they need a recent view of what's going on the ground. We work with groups that have zero geospatial expertise, but we also work with really sophisticated companies that have a lot of geospatial and remote sensing capacity. And those organizations see the value in deploying a purpose-built tool like Lens that's meant to leverage the efficiencies that can be created by remote monitoring. But those efficiencies can only really be created when remote monitoring is actually easy to use and answering real questions that those organizations have. And so those sophisticated groups recognize that maybe they could do this kind of work in-house with their expertise, but by deploying a purpose-built tool like Lens, they can actually really harvest the return on investment that's available from using remotely sensed data. Sort of at a higher level, we built Lens to solve a couple of common pain points that are common in remote monitoring workflows. So a big one is data access. If you've ever worked with commercial satellite companies, you know they tend to require you to buy a large amount of data per transaction. So you can't just go to them and say, hey, I want 10 acres of this particular area of our right of way, and that's all I really need. They're going to want you to, at best, purchase the entire tile with which that right of way is in. But more often, they have a pretty high minimum spend requirement, which makes sense. You know, they're busy, they have a lot of customers. They don't necessarily have the capacity to sell sort of their data a la carte in the same way that an organization like us does. So our platform serves as like a buyer's club, so we can handle all of the negotiating with satellite and aerial imagery vendors, and then our customers purchase the imagery they need for us via our platform on a per acre basis and totally a la carte. Um, Even for stuff like publicly available satellite data, data processing can be a real pain point. So, for example, with a satellite like Sentinel-2, they're capturing new data every 3 to 5 days, but setting up a system to continually access that new data can be a challenge. And so we handle all of the data processing of publicly available data sets so that our customers can just open up a web browser, click into the site they want to see, and see that full library of all of the potential satellite and aerial data that's relevant for them. Um, and then finally, most of our tools are used to view satellite imagery, are meant to be sort of collaborative review and reporting workflow tools. So within the Lens platform, you don't have to have any special geospatial expertise, but you can view recent satellite imagery, you can compare imagery, and then you can create annotations in the forms of notes that get tied to that imagery that can then be shared with managers, shared with partners, pulled into a PDF report to generate a record of the monitoring that's happened. And that's really where the true efficiency gains come from. I mean, there's huge efficiency gains that can be found with just sort of generally deploying remote monitoring as opposed to going out in the field. But being able to do that quickly, where anyone with a web browser can just pull up the most recent image, compare two sites, say, okay, I'm seeing something that's happening, send that off to someone who is going to go out in the field on the ground. That's where something that maybe previously would have taken half a day becomes a 2-minute exercise and really is hugely beneficial to the organizations that we work with. And we do have some studies that have shown from our customers. So, for example, the Nature Conservancy did a study that found that they saved around 30 to 50% in monitoring costs from deploying the Lens platform in partnership with satellite and aerial data as opposed to going out and doing field monitoring. So there is a true return on investment story just from deploying the Lens platform as is. One of the questions that we often get asked in the context of things like trespass detection, encroachment detection, sort of the topic of this webinar today, is can satellite imagery see the things that we even care about? And the answer is often yes. This is a real life example of a utility partner's transmission corridor in an area where they've been having issues with homeless encampments. And this is a 50 centimeter resolution satellite image. And you can see in this image pretty clearly there's a number of vehicles that are parked in this area, plus some areas of dumping and trash. We can't make out things like the exact license plates of the vehicles or the exact nature of what is being dumped, but it's definitely enough information to give us that signal that this is an area of concern that needs to be addressed. We can also pair this type of high resolution satellite imagery, like what we were just looking at, with lower resolution, more frequent satellite data from sources such as publicly available Sentinel-2 satellite data. So Sentinel-2 is a European Space Agency satellite. It's completely freely available and it captures every 3 to 5 days. So it's really helpful for capturing frequent information about what's going on a site. And it also has a sensor that allows us to capture a fourth band of light. So we can create index layers like what we're looking at that tell us different information than what we can see just with looking at true color imagery. In this case, what this is showing us is the burn index layer. So this is showing us areas that have burned recently. And I've also created a time series graph, which is one of the things that you can do in Lens to help pinpoint exactly when this fire happened. This is that same utility site as in the prior slide. And we identified about a 20-acre burn that occurred right under those transmission lines that was likely related to the encampment issues. So being able to combine both the high-resolution true color imagery plus types of index layers like this is a really powerful way to get information about things like potential encampments, encroachments, vegetation management concerns quickly and easily. But as the sort of title of this webinar focuses on, this is really a question of scale. And the workflow that I just described, which is, pull up a site, order a recent satellite image, maybe you're using the compare bar to compare two images and find those changes. That's a super common workflow for all of our customers. But what if our customer has 3,000 small parcels of land across the state of California? Or what if they have a smaller portfolio, but they want to know what's changing on a weekly basis? That's where we run into the issue of scale. And feedback that we've heard from conversations with organizations like the Bureau of Land Management or large energy utilities is that even with the time savings that are provided from using remotely sensed data and a platform like Lens, their portfolios are at a scale where doing manual monitoring just isn't possible for all of their sites. Even if you had an unlimited data budget, they just don't have the manpower to undertake this type of monitoring work. So, for example, if we assume that it takes about 10 or 15 minutes to manually monitor a site, and if we scale that across a portfolio of 3,000 sites, that means that's someone who's spending 8 hours a day, 90 days straight, just to get through one cadence of looking through that entire portfolio. And that's really not realistic. We have never encountered an organization that has one person who's just doing remote monitoring 8 hours a day. Generally, people have a lot of other work on their plate. This is one component of the work that they do, and they're not able to dedicate that kind of time and resources to that kind of monitoring work. That said, if you're an energy utility, you really want to know about something like an illegal encampment pretty frequently. Just doing monitoring once a year isn't really going to give you the kind of information you need to mitigate that kind of risk. And so the feedback we've heard from our partners is that remote monitoring is challenging, field monitoring is challenging, but those are only partially the solution because we can't even get to the kind of scale that we would need manually in order to have visibility across all of our sites. Things like illegal trespass and dumping are real risks that need to be mitigated by many types of businesses, whether it be an energy utility or a government agency or a conservation group. And particularly in fire-prone areas, having encampments in remote locations can be a huge risk that can result in millions of dollars worth of damages. So they're not issues that can be ignored, but it seems like there aren't a ton of solutions out there to address this challenge to date. Um, and so that's what we've been really focused on at Upstream Tech over the last couple months is how do we solve that challenge of scale? And as technology has developed, particularly in the world of leveraging large language models, we've seen a big opportunity to leverage LLMs to help create a monitoring agent that can do that monitoring work on behalf of our customers. So that's what I'll be sharing a little bit more about today is the structure that we've built out to allow customers who are in that scenario of huge portfolios or not a lot of time and limited capacity to still undertake the monitoring that they need to do at the cadence that they need to do. And we're super excited to be the ones tackling this challenge because it's so tied into what we've already been focused on, which really is how do we make remote monitoring a time and money saver for our customers? We basically built Lens with that as the entire focus. And so adding on this additional functionality that helps bring that to scale feels super aligned with what we already do super well. And so I'll actually show you what this looks like in terms of how it's built out into the Lens platform. But just a little bit of context about what we've been solving for. So our sort of like imaginary customer that we've been focused on solving for, and I've talked a bit about this already, but is a customer who has some kind of portfolio of disparate land, right-of-ways, easements, other interests that are geographically dispersed. They're hard to access. Maybe they're remote, or maybe they're not. There's just so many of them that it's hard to monitor at a regular cadence. They are interested in issues like dumping, illegal camping, fires, flooding, vegetation removal, all things that we can see with satellite data. They're looking for a tool that will help point them in the right direction. So they're not necessarily looking for something that is going to capture every single change, every single time, and write those monitoring reports for them. But they're looking for something that can help them take that portfolio of 3,000 sites and say, all right, what are the top 20 that I need to put on my workflow for this month to make sure that I'm focused on. And so that's what we've been really focused on building out. And the way we've approached solving this problem is by combining the best features of different types of satellite and aerial data. So the first tool that we built off of Sentinel-2. And as I mentioned, Sentinel-2 is a free satellite and it captures consistent data every 3 to 5 days. So it's super helpful for getting a high frequency of information. The downside of Sentinel-2 is that it's 10-meter resolution, which is considered lower resolution. So it's great at detecting larger scale changes like fires, the example that I showed before, flooding, someone chopping down a bunch of trees in a forest, but it's not going to be able to pick up on something like a camper that was suddenly parked in an area that is not supposed to be parked. But This is our first line of defense. It's super helpful for letting us know within just a few days if something major is happening on your site. Then we've added a second layer to this, which is our agent. And I'll talk about how that works in a second, but our agent is an automated monitoring tool that runs off of the high resolution satellite data. So the frequency of that data really depends on our partners' needs, their budget, and the availability of high resolution data in their area. But we could run this weekly, monthly, every 6 months, imagining that we're running it on some regular cadence, but it's probably not as frequent as something like the Sentinel-2 based alerts. But the flip side is it is going to be able to identify those smaller scale changes, things like ATV tracks, new dumping piles, new vehicles that are parked long term in an area. And then finally, our customers will always have access to the Lens platform, so they can take a look at the most recently available data at any time from their desktops. So if they get a call from a neighbor saying, hey, someone's been dumping out in this field that you own, hey, county, you own a field, someone's dumping in it, the county staff can just really quickly pull up that area, see if there's any high resolution data that's available. If there is, they can access that and quickly determine, is this something that I need to go out and do a site visit about, or am I not seeing any areas of concern? I can not worry about this today. And I think what we're super excited about is how seamlessly our new change detection tool fits within our existing Lens workflows. So this is something that our customers could deploy within hours of getting a Lens account. It's super simple. And so I'm going to walk through step by step of how this all gets deployed together as one sort of cohesive tool for our partners. And then I'll actually pop over into Lens and we can look at some examples of results that we've been getting from doing the agent runs. But the very first step would be to upload your portfolio of sites. So let's pretend you are an energy utility and you have 1,000 properties that are a mix of fee lands that you own, right-of-ways, areas that are around critical infrastructure that you want to be monitoring for. You would upload the shapefile of those areas into Lens. If you don't have a shapefile for all of those areas, we do also have the ability to just draw an area in, so you could do that as well. The step two would be configure your lookouts. So that is that like tier one that I talked about, derived mostly off of Sentinel-2, that will give you that sort of frequent ongoing alerting feature. And these can be custom built specific to your ecosystem, the things that you care about. So for example, if you are most concerned about new development, let's say you're concerned that a neighbor is going to build a roadway that intersects with a property that you're managing. You could set an alert derived off of NDVI, which is the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. That's measuring the presence of vegetation on the ground. And you could basically say, I want to be notified if a Sentinel-2 sensing comes in where we see a significant drop in that NDVI that's outside of the seasonal norms of what we would expect to see as a result of just sort of like photosynthesis changing over the course of the year. You can set that to send you an email. It can just give you in-app alerts, or it could be ported via API if you're using some other kind of land management system. So you could turn that policy on. You could turn it on for one particular site, or if it's something that you're caring about across your whole portfolio, you could turn it on for your full portfolio of properties. You could create a couple more of these. You could create one for flooding. If you want to know about areas of standing water, you could turn that on. If you're interested in things like potential development, like is someone building a house in a place that they're not supposed to? Maybe you manage a lot of easements. That's a great one for NDVI because generally there's some kind of vegetation disturbance that comes with that kind of development work. So we can help our customers figure out exactly how to set those policies. And there's also tools actually built in to the sort of policy creation feature that allows you to figure out like, where do I set that threshold? How do I make sure I'm getting the most relevant alerts for my ecosystem and needs? But in general, you can create sort of a suite of policies that covers all of the things that you care about, turn it on, and then basically completely forget about it. And you know that you will be getting notifications if something has happened that meets the criteria of things that you care about. And then you can go into Lens, view the data, decide if it's something that's actionable for you. I will also note that in the US, we also have parcel alerting features. So you can find out if a parcel has changed in ownership name or size. So this can tell you if a land parcel has changed hands or if it's been, for example, subdivided, which can be helpful for land management agencies that maybe don't hold the fee title of a property, but still want to know who's responsible for the management of that site. Step three is a similar configuration step that you would undertake with us. We don't expect our customers to do this themselves, but this is where our engineering magic comes in, and this is configuring your agent or agents. So we want our customers' input in the development of this because we envision each agent being slightly different depending on our customer needs. And some customers may decide they want multiple agents to run across different portions of their portfolio. We can configure exactly what your agent is looking for. So, do you care about your agent finding only ATV tracks, only vehicles that are parked, or you want to know everything that has possibly changed across a property? What is your preference in terms of false positives for or negatives? So, as I'm sure you've played around with tools like ChatGPT, they aren't 100% perfect. And would you rather set the agent to be flagging things that they're only 100% certain have changed? Or do you want a potential amount of greater false positives in order to ensure a super thorough review that it's finding potentially everything? So those are the kinds of changes that we can make with our customers to ensure that the agent is operating to notify them about exactly the kinds of things that they care about. And this is something that we imagine we'll iterate with over time as well. So it's not like we just set this once and then completely forget about it. As we start to do runs and get results with our partners, they can give us feedback that then can go into our prompt engineering to make sure that we're starting to get results, improving results that are continuing to be relevant over time. So step three would be configuring the agent. Step four would be selecting your preferred data resolution and frequency. So as I said, the agent is running off of true color, high resolution satellite imagery, but we have a number of options that our customers can choose from in terms of what they're using for that data. So for example, there is a US program called NAEP, where the USDA is capturing high resolution satellite imagery across the entire continental US every 2 years. If you're monitoring cadence, you're fine with every 2 years. You really just want to run through your portfolio once and figure out, what's the current status of all of our sites. Then maybe you choose to use the publicly available data and you don't have any data budget at all. On the flip side of that, some of our customers may feel like the real value in this is finding out about things pretty frequently. And so they're going to want to set up a recurring task, which means they're custom ordering satellite data from a satellite company every week so that they ensure that they will have that high resolution data coverage that they need to run the agent weekly. And all of that is stuff that at Upstream Tech we help our customers with. We set up those recurring task orders. We make sure that the data is delivered into the account. But that's a component of the decision making that really determines how often the agent can be run, is how frequently are we acquiring the data inputs so that we can tell the agent, hey, compare, this prior image with the newest image and tell us what has changed. I did want to flag that you can bring your own data into Lens. So many of our customers have existing relationships with satellite companies or access to data. Maybe they are flying aerial flights at some relative frequency, and all of that can be pulled into Lens. So it doesn't necessarily need to be acquired by us. We can still run the agent on data that you bring yourself. And then step five is run the agent. So once we've configured your portfolio and we have up-to-date imagery, we can then basically tell the agent, hey, do a review of all of these sites and tell us these changes. And that's what I'll jump into Lens to show you an example of the results in a second. But you can see here, this is a list of all of the findings that were found on this run. And so it is both denoting with a little box where the change occurred, but then also actually writing an observation. So it is making an interpretation similar to how if you're using ChatGPT, it's able to, write things for you. It's making an interpretation of what that change actually was, what occurred, what sort of the before image looks like, and what they're seeing in the after image. And so you can quickly click through these and really very quickly get a sense of, okay, on this property, what are we seeing? What has changed? Are there particular risk areas or areas of concern? And this is what that sort of review process looks like. And again, Lens is built entirely around the concept of efficiency. So we want this to be extremely easy to review. We recognize that this is not doing all of the work that a sort of monitoring program would need, and sort of purposefully. I don't know that we would feel comfortable deploying the agent and saying there should be no human review involved in this at all. You can entirely trust the agent results and just sort of take those and send them straight into your workflow management system and send people out into the field. There's this sort of review step where you look through the observations and confirm whether or not they're relevant to the things that you care about. If they are, you can save them as a note, and I'll show you what that looks like in Lens in a second. But if they're not relevant, you can dismiss them. And that's also a way for us to continue to glean information as we work with you to hone the pilot and the prompt, to understand what things you care about, where is it identifying changes that are relevant to your workflows, and where can we hone further to try to eliminate things that you're having to dismiss. And then finally, those lookouts are going to be continuing to provide you with results on an ongoing basis. And so, I have this at step 7, but really this would be happening whenever you want it to happen. It could be that you decide to review those lookout results at some sort of regular cadence at the same time you're doing your agent results. But because you can set it up to send you notifications, here's an example of an area that's sort of in active timber management and a new area that has been harvested and a vegetation drop that was detected as a result of that harvest. So you could decide to log in at any time if you get that notification and want to review that kind of alert. And then finally, Lens is really built for documentation and sharing results. So all of those agent notes can be saved and tied back to the particular property. And you can see here in this example, they get denoted with a particular sort of purple sparkly words that say Lens agent, which is how you know that it was an agent that drafted that particular note. All of those can be edited. And then you can also add your own notes on top of that. So it can be a way for you to get a sense for, what is the agent populating in terms of what's going on in the site, and then add additional annotation as needed. And then all of those can be ported out into PDF reports. That's sort of an example of some of the pages that get automatically created. And you can also create share links to share with others, and I'll show you what that looks like in one second. So why don't we switch over? Let me quickly shift my screen. Get out of this. And so this is Lens. Some of you, I imagine, on this call are current Lens customers, so you already know what Lens looks like. But this is the Lens platform. It's all web-based. As I said, it's really meant to be something that people are pulling up on their browsers whenever they have a question about a site. I also mentioned it's sort of portfolio-based, so our customers are loading their portfolios into Lens, and that gets sort of pulls in all of their different properties. And I apologize, my internet's a little bit slow with the screen sharing, but you can see here sort of a full portfolio of properties here. And all of these can be clicked into, and you can look at, the most recent satellite image. You can zoom in and out. I mentioned the notes. You can generate notes for follow-up and generate reports. The new thing that we've been building is this agent. And so to access your agent runs, you go over to the agent pane over here. And this is where we have some runs. You can see the workflow details. And this is where we're talking about sort of the prompt engineering piece. This is the kind of work that we would do with our partners. So you can see here, in this case, this particular run was focused on identifying buildings, shelters, or tents, alterations to roads, trash piles, dumping or litter, construction activity, and changes in vehicle presence. But that can be changed, and we've done pilots with partners where we've looked at more environmental changes, like they're interested in changes in wetland extent, and have found that we get good results with things like that as well. So it's pretty flexible in terms of the prompt. And then you can see we can run this multiple times. So you can imagine sort of the typical would be that we're running this weekly or quarterly, and our customers can then go in and see the results of those runs. If we click into one of these runs, you can see the first view is this table, which gives you a sense of on which properties there were changes, and you can see those observations and the observation area. What I think is most helpful is this map view, which allows you to really quickly review those changes and decide if there's something that you want to save as a note or dismiss. So you can see here, here's an example of one of the changes that the agent detected with that particular prompt. Multiple new elongated white roof structures. I actually think this is an area that has cannabis production concerns, so this is interesting sort of for that particular workflow, which I know we have some partners who are interested in that. But you can see it pretty clearly found this area where there's a lot of new infrastructure, vehicles, and dumping, and it identified that. So if I want to save that as a note, I can click update. It then automatically just moves me to the next one. So now we're looking at this same area on this site, and it's identifying this area of ground disturbance. So we can see here it looks pretty different. There's some new infrastructure and there's also some new construction, and I can update that as well. We can kind of click around here. You can see on this particular area in Pennsylvania, it found this new construction road. So it's a pretty broad range of things that it's finding, but it's found a couple changes across all of these different properties. If we want to actually go back and do some more investigation into the property itself, we can click this button. It automatically then opens up that particular property. And so I can see, for example, in preparation for this, I saved two agent notes already, but it will quickly take me to the particular imagery I was looking at when I made the note. If I click on this one, it zooms me over to a different part of the property. In this case, it found this pond that had been developed. And so I can sort of click around and quickly view those changes. And then finally, if you want to share this, let's say you are doing this work and you need to send it to a landowner or you want to send it to your boss to say, hey, I'm concerned about this issue, you can go over here and click this share button and you can generate a share link. And this is publicly accessible. So someone doesn't have to have access to a Lens account in order to see this. So now you can see that same annotation is available here, and it will show you the particular area on the site we were looking at. And it's a way to really quickly communicate with others about the kinds of things that you are seeing. So with that, I am going to switch back over to looking at, sorry, one second. I had a PowerPoint slide that had my email address, but I seem to have lost it. So I will drop my email address in the chat, but I promised you this would be short and sweet. This was short and sweet. I know we didn't cover a ton, but I want to make sure we save time for questions. So I'm going to just quickly pull up the Q&A and we can kind of dig through these live. So could this work for detecting changes in wetlands? So I talked about this a little bit, but the short answer is yes. We've experimented with a bunch of different types of prompts and have generally found good results across a broad range of different categories. And the bigger question ultimately, I think, comes down to what are the kinds of things that you can see with this type of satellite imagery? And wetlands is always a tricky one where often folks who are working in the wetland space really need to know a certain level of detail that's beyond what you can see with satellite imagery. So for example, there's often a big focus on the different types of emergent vegetation that's coming out of a wetland, and it can be hard to do that kind of emergent vegetation detection using satellite imagery. But assuming that it is something that is reasonably seen in this kind of high resolution satellite imagery, then we feel pretty confident that we can generate a prompt that will allow the agent to do that work instead of you. So if you can do it as a human, then we think we can probably get the agent to do it as well. The next question is, what is the process to customize this for our sites? So at least for now, we really see this as a sort of process in which we're working closely with the customers to enable this for them. So I imagine as a starting point, with many of the customers that we're sort of initially working with this on, we're doing a pilot where we are working together to prompt engineer, running it across their sites, honing it, spending the time to make sure that it is operational in the way that they want and that they're getting the kinds of results that they want. And then from there, it really comes down to just setting up a structure where there's a recurring cadence of data that's coming in, and then we're running this on behalf of our customers on a recurring cadence. So it can be pretty flexible from there forward in terms of what the relationship looks like. It obviously would require access to a Lens account, access to the required imagery, and then some sort of structure in place to allow access to the agent. It says, do you sell this service to law enforcement agencies? Or it sounds like the question is, do law enforcement agencies use this tool, fish and game, etc.? Could agency use of this imagery be a Fourth Amendment violation? That's a great question. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so I am hesitant to answer this definitively, but we have had customers in the past who are using this type of satellite data to enforce things like conservation easements, and I imagine similarly it would be allowed for enforcement of other types of issues or crimes. And I don't think that the use of the agentic tool, which really is just a triage tool to tell you, look in this particular direction, here's an area of concern, would present any of the other uncertainties that would drawn to question your ability to use the data for that purpose. Um, so I sort of short answer, yes, I believe that this is relevant. And actually, we've had conversations with US Fish and Wildlife Service and other agencies who are interested in using this tool as a management tool to help them understand, what's going on across the sites. Are there concerns about easement violations or other violations of federal law that we can use this to document issues? Let's see. Question. So the agent is only able to analyze changes based on the image your organization purchases. Yes. So we need to have an input. So the agent is basically doing the exact same work that you would do if you are doing manual monitoring yourself, and that requires some kind of before and after image. If there is a publicly available image that we can use and you think that that meets your criteria for temporal scale, resolution, and you're happy with that image, the agent doesn't require it to be something that was purchased, but we do need an image to do that comparison for. And so that's really why many of our customers would be sort of acquiring imagery either through us or through other relationships that they have, is they want that sort of frequent update because that's really where the value comes from using the agent. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Kate, for pulling up my email address. Trying to find another question to close out on because I know we're almost out of time. So I guess the last question I'll answer is about tasking. So for those of you who maybe are less familiar with satellite imagery, I sort of glazed over this, but tasking is the process of custom ordering data from a satellite vendor. So rather than pulling from the archive of data that they are just sort of capturing on a regular basis for other customers, which is something that many of our customers do within Lens, you can say proactively, here are my sites. Please capture an image of these sites. Generally, they request that you give them basically like a 2-week window in which to capture those images. The reason one would do that is to guarantee imagery coverage, because if you've worked with satellite imagery, you know that it's not always consistent in terms of when you're seeing new satellite images come through from our commercial vendors. And so this is a way to guarantee that you're going to have that frequency. With the agent, it doesn't require you to task imagery. You could use archive imagery entirely, or as I said, you could use publicly available imagery and not spend any money on data. But for something like trespass detection, where you're probably going to get the most value out of the agent if you're running it on some sort of regular cadence, this type of tasking relationship can be super helpful for um, making sure that you are getting the kind of coverage that you need to detect the kind of changes that you want to detect. And that's why you would go with a tasking contract. This question is about the cost of taxing, and there is a reduced tasking fee. They do offer a discount if you commit to a certain number of tasks. So if you're saying, I want 6 tasks over the course of the year, many of our vendors do provide a small discount on the sort of per task cost associated with that in order to incentivize that kind of behavior. I think that's what the question was. Um, and with that, I think we are basically at time. So I'm going to say goodbye. But thank you all so much for joining us. It's super exciting for us to share a bit about what we've been building. Super happy to answer questions directly. If anything about this was unclear or piqued your interest, feel free to shoot me an email. And yeah, would love to work with you all. So if this at all resonated with some of the pain points that you might be experiencing with land management, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'd love to figure out a way that we can help support. Thank you so much.